Good morning. It's so great to see all of you here. I feel like I need to introduce myself again. I'm Rick. I'm one of the pastors here. I haven't been here for a few weeks, and I've missed you guys. And over the course of that past few weeks, I don't know if you know this, but many of you have made me feel incredibly cared for and loved. In the early on, about the second week of November, my dad passed away. And since that happened, so many of you have just sent in a flood of cards and texts and phone calls and hugs. And my family and I have felt incredibly cared for. I'm doing well, and I just want to say thank you. Your love for me has meant a lot to my family and me. Also, over the course of this past few weeks, we've got some great things to celebrate. It was just over 2 months ago, we launched something called the Freedom Campaign. And it was our goal to let's pay off our debt. Let's pay off a mortgage for Next Chapter Ministries, one of our ministry partners here in the city. And let's build a children's center at the Compassion Evangelical Hospital, which is something we partner with in Guinea, Africa. And wouldn't you know it, everything is fully funded. We are debt-free, and our generosity initiatives are fully funded because of your generosity. Yeah, we can celebrate. This is great stuff. I'm so excited. It's a great way to go into this season. I'm really excited about the holiday season. I'm excited about this Christmas message series we're kicking off, and it's a great thing to invite your friends to. I would encourage you to do that. And we've tried to make that easy. Hopefully there's some left over, but in the seat back pocket of the chair in front of you, you can find invitations. You could use those to invite people to come to any of our weekend services, especially Christmas Eve. We look forward to that. And I'm just of the mind, I believe that everybody, whether you are a fully devoted follower of Jesus, or you would say that you're a person that has some big questions or maybe some doubts that's keeping you from belief, that everybody will say, it feels like there are things in this message series that's written just for me. Today, as we launch this message series, I think it needs to begin with a bit of a warning, kind of a heads up. Has anyone ever been canoeing? Anybody ever tried to stand up in a canoe? It's a bit dicey. Today, there's going to be a moment where it might feel like I'm asking you to try and stand in two canoes at once. It's going to feel a little wobbly, but if you just hang in there with me, I think it'll all come together and make sense by the end. So let's start with this question. Should we trust the Bible on matters of faith, but lower our expectations on matters of fact? Is it a bad thing or is it a good thing to elevate the spiritual content of the Bible over the stuff that it claims as historical fact? I mean, is it good? Is it acceptable? Is it okay for us to go, I really trust the Bible on a faith level, but I'm not so sure if I trust it when it says, well, these things actually happened in history. This is a time of year where the word believed is overused, maybe, perhaps even abused. And the word believe can take on a different form than the way that a historian or maybe an investigative journalist might use it. Instead of something that is structured and fixed to a foundation, this concept of belief can feel a bit like Play-Doh. Now, just about any Christmas movie that you're going to watch with your kids or your grandkids or whatever, you're going to find somehow, some way woven into the morale of that story is that your belief is what makes it real. This is my all-time favorite Christmas movie. If you don't love this movie, I might have some doubts about your sense of humor. There's a pivotal scene, a climactic scene towards the end of this movie where we learn that Santa's sleigh is powered by belief. And that works great for kids. It's real because you believe it. It's powerful because you believe it. But come on, all the adults in the room, the adults watching online, that's childish, right? I mean, you would probably never say something like this in an adult conversation. It's real because you believe it. And yet I bet a bunch of us know adults who've taken on a more sophisticated version of this. And the sophisticated version of that is this. It's meaningful because you believe it. This is the time of year that we naturally turn to traditions, and I think it's motivated by something deeper than just nostalgia. A lot of us, we're trying to infuse meaning into what we do this month. We want our celebrations to have meaning. We want our time with family to have meaning. We want engagement with church to have meaning. And you can just bank on it. There are going to be more people who attend churches this month than last month. And if I'm describing you, I think that's great. I mean, this is even the time of year we want our money to have meaning, don't we? That's why generosity is universally elevated and embraced. But since we're calling this message series The Great Christmas Adventure, let's go on a little adventure into vulnerability and honesty. Let me ask this question. Does believing that something is meaningful, does that actually make it meaningful? And if you dare to go there, you will find that that is a deep and existentially urgent question. Do we have the ability to give a belief meaning, to give it truth? Or can we only discover truth and only discover meaning? What do you think? We live in a culture that is awash with this way of thinking. And for those of us who are in the room, maybe even watching online, if you would say, hey, I'm not a follower of Jesus, I got kind of doubts, I'm not religious, I don't know where I land with all this yet. Is this way of thinking, does it fit with reality, or is it a fight with reality? Or for those of us who would say, yeah, I'm a follower of Jesus, let me ask you a similar question. Is this way of thinking, does it fit with the Bible, or is it a fight with the Bible? And wherever you're coming from, whatever point on your spiritual journey, I want you to think about those questions as we read this from the New Testament. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word, that servants of Jesus. With this in mind, since I myself carefully investigated everything, from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of, you can know the certainty of the things that you have been taught. These are the first lines of the Gospel of Luke, which was written by a guy named Luke. He was not an apostle. He was not a companion of Jesus. He was not an eyewitness to anything that he wrote down concerning Jesus. He was a historian. That's kind of a big deal, and that's to our benefit. He was a guy who was not content to simply believe what he was told. And he lets us in on a mindset that was obviously present among some of the earliest converts to Christianity. If something isn't true, it should not be trusted. You might be wondering, who is this Theophilus fellow that Luke is writing for? I don't know. He was probably somebody of prominence, but that's just a guess. But what's most important is not who he was writing to, but why. It was not Luke's goal to create something meaningful. It was his intent to write down an orderly account, something knowable, understandable. It was based on truth. He wanted to know, is the substance of the Christian faith built on knowable facts? And when he wrote this was his intent. If you're a note taker, you could write this down. Luke's intent was that we trust him on matters of faith and fact. Luke seems to be the kind of guy who would say to us, if you can't trust the biblical account in matters of fact, why would you trust it in matters of faith? And so today, with eyes wide open, we want to look at the things that he presents as historical fact. We want to know, is he credible? Because if what he presents isn't credible, well, he's the kind of guy who would say to us, it doesn't really matter what we believe. And so we're going to continue reading what he wrote at the beginning of chapter 2. We're going to identify some of the historical facts that he includes along the way. In those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world, claimed to effect. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, another fact. And everyone went to their own town. This is what he's claiming. This happened in history. They went to their own town to register. So Joseph, he went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea to Bethlehem to the town of David. Because he belonged to the house and line of David, he went there to register with Mary, who was pledged to be married to him and was expecting a child. Luke was not a weak sauce writer. He included verifiable historical markers that served like road signs pointing to the credibility of Jesus coming, surrounded by real knowable historical events. It is a fact of history. And whatever it is you think about the Bible, you got to hand it to Luke. He wrote in such a way that we could test and scrutinize his credibility. And you want to know something? A lot of people have. Now, there's no shortage of people. There's no shortage of scholars who will say, you know what? The facts of history are not on Luke's side. He was bad at history. Can't be trusted. Now, that's a reason. There have been a lot of people who have turned their backs on the Bible and turned their back on the Christian faith. I know people like that. You might know people like they say, how could I trust this when he clearly is not trustworthy, when he started out with a promise that he could be? And I want us to be the kind of church I want us to be the kind of people where knowing that grabs us by the heart, where we deeply care about people who would turn their back and walk away of the faith because they're convinced that the Bible and the gospel accounts are not trustworthy. And if we're people who care about that, then we've got to ask this question. Well, why? What are the reasons for skepticism? What are the reasons that would cause people to say that I can't trust this? Well, some very intelligent people, some scholars have said this. There was no requirement for citizens to return to their ancestral home during a census. That's a fact. There is no record of multiple censuses ever being taken by Quirinius. He didn't take multiple. That's a fact. Quirinius wasn't even governor until AD 6, and this is why that's important, because Jesus was born somewhere on the line from 6 to 4 BC. That means that Jesus was already 10 years old when Quirinius became governor. Kind of a big problem for Luke's timeline. Caesar Augustus never issued an empire-wide census. It's a fact. So how's Luke's credibility looking to you now? And this is a question that I really want to ask. If Luke got the facts of history wrong, do you want to know? And if he got the facts of history wrong, does it even matter? Is it okay to elevate the spiritual content of the Bible over matters of facts of history? Who's feeling the Christmas spirit? If you're thinking, Rick, this does not feel like a joyful Christmas message to start off the month. Well, that's okay. Hang with me. The substance of our faith is more than a feeling. So what I want to do is we're going to dig into this, but I want to put that on pause. And this is the moment of the message where it might feel like I'm asking you to stand in two canoes. We're going to put this on pause for a second, and instead we're going to turn our attention to a conversation that Jesus had with some of his closest companions. Right? And as we read about this conversation, it was written down by a guy who was there when it went down. His name is Matthew. He wrote this. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And this is what was happening. This was the conversation. Jesus, who is your favorite? Which one of us is the most important? We've been fighting about it. We need you to settle the argument. Jesus responded this way. He called a little child to him, and he placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." Here's the backstory of what just happened right before that conversation. Jesus had just shared some heavy stuff from his heart. He's talking to his closest companions, and he tells them that he's going to be killed, and they're just not getting it. It doesn't make its way into their brain at all. Have you ever had that kind of conversation? You're sharing something monumentally important, somebody doesn't get it? Like, have you ever tried that with a child? Like, you're trying to share something big and important that's maybe too big for them, so you get down on eye level, and you're just sharing this really important thing, and you could tell in their face, they're getting it, they're pondering it, and they look you deep in the eye, and they say, "Can I have a snack?" This is what's going on here. Jesus is sharing deep from his heart, and they're just not getting it. They're locked in an ego contest. They're more concerned about their standing than understanding, and that's when Jesus dropped a bomb, and he did it on purpose. And he says, "Hey guys, you want in my kingdom? You cannot get in unless you come as a child." And I don't know what comes to mind when you hear that, but there's something more important than what comes to your mind and what comes to my mind. What's really most important is, what did Jesus mean? And when he said these words, I know he wasn't being mean. He wasn't being angry. He was so gentle, and he is so tender in his delivery that a little child willingly climbed into his arms. And as hard as this might be to hear, he said it with gentleness and tenderness. Coming to Jesus as a child means coming to him in vulnerability and humility. Jesus will not accept anyone who comes to him from a disposition of pride, but he will gladly embrace anyone who comes to him in vulnerability and humility. And this is the time of year. This is the season where we naturally turn our attention back to remembering that's exactly how he came to us, in vulnerability and humility. as we remember that he is God who literally took on what it means to be a real human person, remembering that he came to us as a baby is monumentally important. Jesus came to us as a child. We should come to him as a child, not childishly. And over the next few weeks, we're going to unpack the significance of this. And this is the time of year that you hear this kind of word at church. You hear the word Advent, and it comes from a Latin word which means coming. Jesus came to us, and we get to come to him. And I am convinced there is no greater adventure in life than coming to him and following him. But if we're going to embark on that adventure and stay on that adventure, it means that we adopt a disposition of vulnerability and humility. And in the moment in history when Jesus said this, in this cultural moment, children had no rights and no protections whatsoever. And seriously taking on the disposition of a child means saying to Jesus, my well-being depends on you. My security, my safety depends on you. I am inadequate in and of myself, and I am utterly dependent on you leveraging your strength for my good. For some of you, maybe vulnerability and humility come easily. They do not come easily to me. I naturally despise vulnerability. It makes me uncomfortable. I naturally despise humility. I don't have any good reasons to be prideful. That fact has not stopped me yet. But at some point, at some level, I think you're going to find that this impacts us all and confronts us all profoundly. And if the guys who were closest to Jesus, his dearest companions, had to change their approach to him, maybe, just maybe, it's to our benefit to consider what our approach to Jesus is. And maybe it needs to be changed. And as we think about that, let's also consider what are the possible ways to approach Jesus. And as we do that, let's pick up where we left off with some of the objections that are being thrown at Luke's account of the coming of Jesus. And let's consider what are some possible approaches to both Jesus and to the gospel accounts of his coming to us. And so here's one. One approach is we could approach Jesus childishly. I don't care about the facts, just tell me what to believe. This is the attitude that says, I don't care if Luke got the historical facts wrong, I don't want to know. I just believe what he says, I don't want to know any more than that. If you think about it, it's not much different than your average Christmas movie, is it? It's real because I believe it. But that's childish. Does anybody in our church have that approach? Maybe, probably, I don't know. But instead of trying to pinpoint who in here might have that approach, what if we considered, is there any of that approach inside of ourselves? And if someone had that approach, how would they know? Well, let me ask a few questions. Do questions ever make you uncomfortable? Is it your practice you tend to only listen to people who already agree with everything you already agree with? Does the presence or the lack of certainty ever cause you to shut down or disengage? Are you overly concerned with what other people think about you? If you're not able to risk losing face by vulnerably engaging doubts and curiosity and challenging questions, well, maybe there's a little bit of this approach in you. And believe it or not, the root of the childish approach is pride. What could be more arrogant than predetermining a conclusion and shutting down anyone and everything that disagrees with you? Well, here's another approach. We could approach Jesus cynically. And this is the attitude that says, I don't care about the facts, I won't believe. This is the attitude that says, I'm not really interested if there are answers that resolve the objections. I'm convinced I can't be convinced. Belief is not for me. Are there people in our church who have that approach? I don't know, I kind of hope so. Because that means today we get to have this conversation. How would someone know if they've adopted that approach? Do questions that challenge your way of thinking ever make you uncomfortable? Would people who know you best, would they say that your questions often sound like accusations? Do you have a tendency to only listen to people who already agree with everything that you think? Do you have a tendency to listen with the intent to reply instead of the intent to understand? Does the presence of certainty make you uncomfortable? And are you overly concerned with what other people think? If you can't risk losing face by vulnerably engaging answers, maybe there's a little bit of this approach in you. And believe it or not, the root of the cynical approach is pride. What could be more arrogant than predetermining a conclusion and shutting down anyone or anything that disagrees with you? But there are a couple of other approaches. One approach to Jesus is cautiously. I care about the facts, but I'm hesitant to believe. And for my money, there is wisdom in this approach. Coming to Jesus as a child means elevating vulnerability and humility. And this is an approach that takes vulnerability seriously. It's possible to get things wrong. It's possible I could be wrong. And I don't want to be fooled, so I'm moving slowly. And if I'm talking about you, or I'm talking about you who might be watching us online, there's some things you need to know about our church. One of our guiding values is you can belong before you believe. You can take all the time you need to investigate and evaluate and process all that we're talking about. And no one is ever going to pressure you to think like we think or to act like we act. As a matter of fact, we've put together some resources for you if you're who I'm talking to right now. And I'd love it if everybody would take out your phone and open up autumnridge.church. And if you do, you're going to find at the top of the page a tile that says interested in Jesus. And you can engage in a number of different ways. You can be totally anonymous and just read some resources. Or you can crank up the engagement a little bit and you have a way to send in some questions and a pastor will email you back. Or you could say, you know what, I'd like to meet some people in this church who share some of the same questions I do. And we have a great class called Starting Point where you can ask whatever questions you want in a judgment-free zone. I would encourage you to check that out. But there's one more approach, isn't there? And this is the approach that honors what Jesus was talking about. We could approach him as would a child. I care about the facts, and I will humbly submit to truth. This is not blind trust. This is not believing without good reasons. That's naivety, that's gullibility, that's childish. But it takes vulnerability and humility to say, I submit to truth. Truth does not submit to me. And if I get that relationship wrong, I have exposed myself to all kinds of consequences that come from my own arrogance. And it takes humility to say, I don't have the right, I don't have the authority, I don't have the ability to give a belief meaning or to give it truth. I can only discover if there's meaning. I can only discover if there's truth. And so with that in mind, I want us to look again at what Luke wrote. He said, in those days, Caesar Augustus issued a decree that a census should be taken of the entire Roman world. This was the first census that took place while Quirinius was governor of Syria, and everyone went to their own town to register. This is the battleground. This is the front lines of facts. This is the front line over trustworthiness and credibility. These are the facts that are in dispute. As a church, one of our guiding values is to take truth seriously. We'll follow it, whatever it is, wherever it leads. And if we're going to care about the facts, and if we're going to care about the truth, it's going to require some effort on our part. We can't be passive. There's a guy named N.T. Wright. He's a New Testament scholar and historian. He says some things that I think are very helpful to us. I think interesting for us. He said this, the past is a very different place. You cannot just jump from Atlanta to Antioch or leap from Rochester to Rome. He did say Rochester. He was thinking about you when he wrote this. You can't just leap from Rochester to Rome without doing some serious historical, hermeneutical, cultural, and social studies along the way. You will need to roll up your sleeves and be prepared to get your hands dirty. The childish approach and the cynical approach require no effort from you whatsoever. But if we're going to dare to take the cautious approach, or if we are going to dare to approach Jesus with the disposition of a child, we are going to have to roll up our sleeves. Are you in? All right, good. So let's look at the facts. Fact number one, there is no requirement for citizens to return to their ancestral home during a census. Well, it's true. There was no universal Roman law that was the case. But anybody who uses this as grounds to attack Luke's credibility is either underinformed or they are intentionally dishonest. There's a very real place we can go to, the British Museum on Great Russell Street in London. And housed in this museum, they have an ancient Greek papyrus that talks about how a Roman census was taken in Egypt. Do you want to know what it says? I'm glad you asked. says, Gaius Vibius Maximus, prefect of Egypt, says, the enrollment by household being at hand, it is necessary to notify all who for any cause whatsoever, for any reason whatsoever, they're outside their nomes, which means territory, to return to their domestic hearths. You got to return to your home, that they also may accomplish the customary dispensation of enrollment, it's talking about a census, and continue steadfastly in the husbandry, that's the care of their household, that belongs to them. While there was no universal Roman law that said you always have to go back to your family's home for a census, it is an undisputed fact of history that sometimes it was mandated. And if Joseph, Mary's husband, if he owned any property in Bethlehem, which was very likely, he certainly would have had to return to Bethlehem. Score 1 point for Luke. Let's continue. What are the facts? There's no record of multiple censuses taken by Quirinius, and Quirinius wasn't governor until AD 6, when Jesus would have been 10 years old. These are facts. They're true. But there's more to the story if you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty. We can tackle both of these by looking again at what Luke wrote, and we got to remember that this was originally written in Greek. And without nerding out on you too much, let me just tell you a little bit about the Greek grammar of this. It's not only allowable, but it's incredibly reasonable to translate this as this was before the census that took place while Quirinius was governor. And that would resolve all the controversy with these two disputes. But there's another option for us available as well. The Greek word that we use to translate governor, it does not only mean governor. It's a word used to describe all kinds of high-ranking government offices. And we know for a fact that there is, and you're going to see this in just a second, that there was a census that took place exactly when Jesus was born. Quirinius was a high-ranking government official in the area of Israel when that census was taken. And there is a very strong case from history that he was the administrator who oversaw that census. Whichever way you go, either way, Luke is vindicated. There's one more. Caesar Augustus never issued an empire-wide census. That's true. I'm curious, are you familiar with the Res Gestae Divi Augusti? Anybody got that on your nightstand? You've been reading it, been thumbing through it? It was originally an inscription, but that's been replicated over the years. And what it is, it's Latin, it means the deeds of the divine Augustus. And it's his account of his 35 greatest accomplishments. And I want to read to you just a section of achievement number 8, talking about something that's dated at 28 BC. He said, I carried out a census of the people and performed a lustrum after a lapse of 42 years. Then a second time I performed a lustrum, and that's dated around 8 BC. At that lustrum, 4.2 million citizens were registered. Now, I don't think most of us use the word lustrum in our everyday conversation, so I highlighted that. And what that means is it's something that took place over a 5-year span. Do you remember when we said Jesus was born somewhere on the timeline of 6 to 4 BC? That lines up perfectly with a 5-year window being conducted at a census at this time. Caesar goes on to write, thirdly, I performed a lustrum with consular imperium with Tiberius Caesar, my son, as colleague in the consulship of Sextus Pompeius, an unfortunate name, and Sextus Apuleius, which every time I read that, I think Sextus Applesauce, in AD 14. And at that lustrum, 4.9 million citizens were registered. I want to share this with you because over the span of 42 years, Caesar Augustus conducted multiple censuses designed to survey the entire Roman Empire. And Luke himself writes that there was more than one census. It is at best a bad faith reading to try to pretend that Luke is saying there was one empire-wide census. So skeptical scholars have brought their strongest objections. And Luke just emerges undefeated. Now, it's a good thing to bring questions. It's a good thing to bring doubts and to raise challenges. That's a really good thing. And I'm convinced biblical Christianity has good answers, has the best answers, that it offers truth. And I've bet my life on that deeply held belief. And I'm sure there are people who would say, Rick, that's childish. After 25 years of taking on countless questions head on, biblical Christianity keeps coming up a winner. Biblical Christianity is not some fragile, wobbly thing that needs to be protected from your scrutiny. It is a mountain. And it can handle the weight of your doubt, of your indifference, of your concerns, of your hope. And we can know that Jesus stepped out of heaven and into human history. And if he could carry the weight of the cross, and if he could rise from the dead, he can carry the weight of whatever question and concern that you have. And no matter how heavy it might be to you, it is light to him. And when we bring our questions and our concerns to him, he not only gives us answers in exchange, he gives us truth. And it is truth that is easy and light to carry. And it is truth that will carry you. So I want to encourage you with this final statement. Faith is not in competition with the facts. It is a consequence of the facts, trusting in what is true. This is the time when we remember that Jesus truly came to us in vulnerability and humility. He came to us as a child. We should come to him as a child, not childishly. And so this is my question to you today. What is your approach going to be to him?